I do want to go ahead and explain something to you first before I show you this video clip. So Abby Martin was recently at RIMPAC, and she was on Breakthrough News, and she had an interview with Ronnie Akalik, and they were talking about some of the issues that she saw with the military-industrial complex and how it is affecting the climate issue. But before I get into that, I want to explain to you what RIMPAC actually is, because I don't want you to be like, what is she talking about? What is a RIMPAC or whatever? So let's go ahead and get into that. Okay, so what exactly, try to make this bigger, is RIMPAC? RIMPAC, the Rim of Pacific Exercise, is the world's largest international maritime warfare exercise. RIMPAC is held during June and July of even-numbered years from Honolulu, Hawaii, with the exception of 2020, where it was held in August. It is hosted and administered by the United States Navy Indo-Pacific Command, headquartered at Pearl Harbor, in conjunction with the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, and Hawaii National Guard forces under the control of the governor of Hawaii. The U.S. invites military forces from the Pacific Rim and beyond to participate. With RIMPAC, the United States Indo-Pacific Command seeks to enhance interoperability, among Pacific Rim armed forces as a means of promoting stability in the region to the benefit of all participating nations. It is described by the U.S. Navy as a unique training opportunity that helps participants foster and sustain cooperative relationships that are critical to ensuring the safety of sea lanes and security on the world's oceans. Now, everything I just read to you, if you're not really reading too much into that, it may not sound that bad, but it is indeed problematic when it comes to the environment. So Abby Martin is actually going to discuss that here. Again, she was on Breakthrough News. She was talking to Ronnie Akalik. I want you to hear what Abby Martin has to say about all of this.
So we are very, very honored to be joined by Abby Martin, journalist and host of the Empire Files. Abby, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you so much for having me, you guys.
Anytime. And I know many of our fans follow the Empire Files, so some people probably know you were recently at RIMPAC. I know it's a big military, exercise or whatever they call those things these days. But maybe you can certainly tell me more about what RIMPAC is and what took you there to observe this bacchanal there from the U.S. military.
Well, it's all part of our reporting on Earth's Greatest Enemy. This is a film about the environmental impact of the U.S. military. I think a lot of us agree that environmental collapse and climate change are the biggest threats facing not only our species, but a lot of life on Earth. A lot of scientists on the issue of climate change are very conservative in their estimates because they don't want to be seen as political. So even the most conservative estimates are pretty dire here. But there's a huge gap in the discussion of the environmental movement that links the U.S. military as the world's largest institutional polluter, the world's largest consumer of fossil fuels. And it's such a huge, broad topic that encompasses so many facets. I mean, Superfund sites of toxic dumping, burn pits, chemical runoff, just the environmental destruction of warfare, and obviously bases, the existence of nearly 1,000 bases around the world. So it's a lot. And RIMPAC fits into this because it's the largest war games in the world.
So I hope you heard that. I'm going to play a little bit more, but this is the largest one. And I continue to tell people that the military-industrial complex is the largest single most polluter in the world. There is no war here. This is an exercise that they do. So the United States doesn't necessarily have to be at war with another country. They are still pretending to do so, even if they're not, when they have exercises like RIMPAC. And this is still polluting the environment. She's going to go into more detail about things that it does with, animals in the ocean and so forth. But for people who say that they're serious about some type of climate reform, if they're not serious about the military and industrial complex pollution, they're not really serious about climate reform. This is more powerful than anything else that we do. So even for someone like me, I recycle, but that's not enough to undo the damage that's being done by these types of exercises that are done at RIMPAC or just war abroad in general. It's not enough. This is why I tell people, when you look at these things in reference to carbon footprint, yes, an electric vehicle is better than driving a non-electric vehicle, but it is still small in reference to the damage that is done by the military industrial complex. Just something I want you to understand. So we can make these little changes in our lives, but it's still not enough to undo what the MIC is doing to the environment. That's the biggest problem. So let's go back in here.
Overseen by the United States military that conducts these exercises with 25 other countries. And every 2 years, they're conducted off the coast of Hawaii, already a very militarized place, heavily occupied by the US military, environmentally, destroyed pretty much, hundreds of toxic sites, several Superfund sites. So it already is kind of putting salt in the wound to even host these off the coast of what Hawaiians consider as like a legally occupied land in itself. But basically, US naval officials claim that these massive war games that are all about, enforcing an international rules-based order, which I find really fascinating considering the allies that are involved in this, including Israel, which is like, why on earth is Israel participating in these war games? Basically, it's just power projection, right? It's just basically.
Oh, that's a good question, though, that she just was asking there. Why is Israel involved in these war games?
Asserting that the United States, as well as all of these other kind of colonial powers, own this huge region of the world. And this year was the largest year. It kind of scaled back during COVID, and it had 25,000 military personnel from all over the world, and just dozens and dozens of these assault ships, submarines, helicopters, and they use live ammunition, missiles, bombs, and I can go on and on about how destructive these are to the environment, but that is why we went to cover them, because there's so little coverage that is critical about what they are doing over there.
So Abby is making a film. That's why she was there covering this information. I'm actually surprised they let her document it, to be honest with you. But she just wants to make more people aware about the type of damage that is happening. Someone mentioned Hawaii wants their land back. Yeah, that's another problem, right? I mean, the U.S. took that land, just like the U.S. is taking land from other people. So that's a whole nother topic that we can get into as well. But yes, you were right on. I think it was Heidi that said that. You were right on. So let's go back in here.
Yeah, I mean, Abby, I was listening to, you did an episode about this, and I was listening to part of it, and it was interesting, just the access you got and also the way you were treated, which I know is going to be, featured in your film. I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like. I know you also got to ask a question to the Secretary of the Navy, so I'm excited to see what that looked like. You've been asking lots of cool questions to very important people recently, and doing quite a good job at that. But I wanted to ask about the sort of geopolitical context here, because, as it was framed, this is not directed at any country, but Empire Files released this footage you guys got of these sort of I don't know if it was a mock operation in a mock village taking place, but in that there seemed to be soldiers going into a house that had pictures of Kim Jong-un. So clearly this was, directed at North Korea. But on top of that, this is also as a part of a very anti-China coalition. I mean, the fact that it was taking place in the Pacific, I think, is very symbolic. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about the geopolitical context here? Was China discussed? Was the sort of anti-China alliance and this escalation of Cold War against China present in the war games as far as you saw?
Yeah, first I want to address your first point because it's really interesting in terms of geopolitical forces because, I was the only critical journalist there. There was very little people there covering the largest war games in the world, and the only other U.S. reporters there were kind of stenographers for the military-industrial complex. The reporters.
See, this is one of those times where I wonder if maybe there weren't many U.S. journalists there is because they may not even know about it. Before I told you guys about RIMPAC tonight, how many of you knew about it? So I wonder if that's part of the reason. Who knows? I don't know. Or maybe they are ignoring this issue. That's a possibility as well. Maybe they're afraid if they were to go down there that they would be censored or it wouldn't even be covered. They would write an article, they would get video footage, and then they would get back to their editor and it wouldn't even be covered. Who knows?
For defense, one covering how cool the systems and tech was of these ships and operations, and then the other half of the contingent of press were Taiwanese media, and so they were very, very insistent on currying favor with Taiwan, letting in Taiwanese media. Taiwan has been invited for the first time in the NDAA. Actually, Congress extended the invitation for Taiwan to participate in RIMPAC.
Did you guys hear that? This is very important. Let's go back just a little bit here where she talks about whether or not there was some type of favoritism in reference to the Taiwan and China situation.
Operations, and then the other half of the contingent of press were Taiwanese media. And so they were very, very insistent on currying favor with Taiwan.
Did you hear that? You guys see what's happening? They were in favor of Taiwan. Where did Nancy Pelosi just go? She just went to Taiwan. You see what's happening?
Letting in Taiwanese media. Taiwan has been invited for the first time in the NDAA. Actually, Congress extended the invitation for Taiwan to participate in RIMPAC. China, amazing.
Congress extended the invitation for Taiwan to participate in RIMPAC. They extended the invitation. So let's put two things together here, guys. Nancy Pelosi goes to Taiwan, obviously upsets people in China. They're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You're sending a message. I told you guys that was sending a message. She didn't do anything that Joe Biden didn't want her to do. That's why Joe Biden didn't comment on it. So that happened. Now we're talking about RIMPAC. And Abby Martin is just letting you know that Congress extended an invitation to Taiwan to come and to be there. So what is that? You see, guys, see what's going on? That's enough. That's two things now. That's two. That's another message that they're sending to China.
Did participate in 2014 and 2016 only because the United States wanted them to stop militarizing the South China Sea. And then they basically realized it was better to just kind of block them off and just to position, this kind of imperialist bloc against China. So as we saw the Asia pivot reinforced, of course, especially exacerbated during the Trump administration, that's when we saw China become the main focal point here for these war games. Of course, officials will say over and over again.
And why would they do that? Why would China be the main focal point for those war games unless they felt it would be necessary in the future? Not trying to speculate. I'm just calling it like I see it. Let's go back in.
No, this isn't about any one country, but admirals will, go off the record or go off the cuff rather at many press conferences and basically admit that all of this is simulating and posturing toward China's aggressive maneuvers that they're going to take Taiwan in the next 10 years. So all of this is basically mock, drills and operations to prevent that happening. And as you mentioned, very importantly, so North Korea is also involved in this as well. There
it is. Remember, these are exercises that they do. It's like practice. They're not practicing for no reason. People thought that we were exaggerating when we said, like, over on RBN, like, what is Nancy Pelosi trying to get us into? We were saying, like, oh my God, please do not get us into any type of conflict here with China. Does it sound like we were exaggerating now? They've been practicing for this, guys. They're practicing. Nick says this is just a warm-up, folks. Exactly.
Was mock invasions of residential neighborhoods with pictures of DPRK leaders on the walls. And again, this is 25 countries that are training to invade residential neighborhoods in North Korea. And I would just beg people to really think about that mental exercise. If North Korea, North Korea does prepare against a US invasion of its country for obvious reasons. But imagine if North Korea was working with all of Asia to do like mock invasions of residential neighborhoods in DC with pictures of the founding fathers on the walls. It's just beyond the pale. I mean, it's beyond comprehension because it just simply wouldn't happen. So the fact that this is all posturing against China, I think really says a lot. And, just this international rules-based order and to deter against military expansionism, it's just such projection. Who is the expansionist force in the Pacific? Who is enforcing an international rules-based order and who is violating flagrantly all of the rules and norms around the world? It's the United States and its allies.
That's right. It's us. We're the ones causing problems with everyone. It's usually us. But we want to put this focus on a country like China right now. And I'm not here to say that China is perfect, but hello, the United States has intervened in so many other countries. They have ruined people's lives in those countries with regime changes, with starvation, with sanctions. That's something that the US government has done to multiple countries. I went through the list one night on this show. How many times the US government has intervened in other countries? It was a long list. This is going back decades. So here's the thing. Here's the question that I have. If Abby Martin was not there at RIMPAC, will we have this story right now? She just told you there weren't many other U.S. journalists there. Let's go on.
No, it's a good point. I mean, it's
question.
almost like you're through the looking glass, quite frankly, when you're thinking about, that's really unbelievable. When you guys released the video, I just thought, it's like in a way you're like, oh man, I guess I'm not surprised that they're training against North Korea, but you've got to be kidding me right now. Especially when they always say, well, we don't want to have any sort of war with North Korea. They're just a bunch of crazy people with nuclear weapons. And it's like, oh, okay. But, you mentioned this a little bit in when you were setting the scene for us, Abby, that I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about, which is, the impact of these war games, the environmental impact. I mean, I know a lot of people, I first learned about this from Empire Files, have heard about Red Hill recently and the impact the military had there in terms of, the environmental situation. But, what is this, having these happen year after year after year, really what is the impact on the Hawaiian people and the Hawaiian Islands?
Here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Eugene. And it's something that's so unquantifiable because no one can speak for the creatures in the ocean that are gravely impacted by these war games. I mean, on top of the obvious impacts of just leaching chemicals, pollution from these ships, emissions from all of these assault vehicles and subs and helicopters, all of that, there's exemptions for the military, as we know, not only with climate and environmental protections, but also exemptions to go into protected waters that are protected from other commercial boats from traveling into. So this encompasses all across the Pacific Ocean that the military can just go and conduct these operations in these waters. They're protected for a reason, right? Interestingly enough, through my research, I found that so this is the 28th year that RIMPAC has been happening, up until 2013, the US Navy was basically not only exempt from the Marine Mammal Protection Act, whales, dolphins, sea otters, things like that, but they were also saying that during these exercises, they could take which really means harm or kill 25,000 protected marine mammals
Jesus.
for these exercises. And I'm pretty sure that they met every single time that they were conducted. Now think about how insane that is. I mean, 25,000.
They're just killing animals like it's not. See, this is a problem. This is a problem. My husband was mentioning something to me recently about endangered species. Like when we were growing up, we used to hear about that more. And he mentioned to me, like, notice you don't hear much about that anymore. What happened to we need to protect endangered species? We don't even hear much. He's right. I don't hear much about it now. No one cares. I think she dropped out. What happened?
Marine mammals in the
Oh, there
ocean,
she goes.
25,000. Okay. When you're talking about harming or killing them, if you harm them by practicing this high intensity sonar blasts, that is killing them. I mean, when you are preventing these animals from being able to communicate, from migrating, from mating, that is essentially killing them and preventing them from being able to live. So it is astounding. That number is absolutely shocking. They've been exempt ever since. There was a couple lawsuits against them that they said that they were using low intensity sonar blasts. We still cannot quantify how much of an impact that is happening and how impactful that is to miles and miles. I mean, the Navy basically claims that they have like a scout on top where they're like, oh, nope, whale ahoy, like don't fire this giant missile and like sink the ship, which they do also. They sink these giant ships every time that they conduct RIMPAC, which crush coral reefs and do all these things. But it's like, dude, that does not, like, you're not accounting for hundreds of miles of these mammals migrating underwater. And again, like, you can't calculate the effects of these, because if something, if a whale's beached 100 miles away, the Navy could just be like, well, plausible deniability. We have no idea if that was a result of these sonar blasts or not. And again, the crushing of coral reefs, all fish underwater live basically by sound. And so the sonar blasting, again, like, it just has an incredible impact that we will not know, because no one is doing correct environmental assessments of this, certainly not the Navy.
Let's talk about that for a second in reference to the animals in the ocean. I don't know about you guys, but I love seafood. It is what it is. I was born in Maryland, okay? My parents are from Maryland. Listen, I grew up on seafood. Something I do want to let you know, if you're like me and you do like seafood, I don't know how much longer that's going to be a thing where we can eat seafood. Because when you have all these chemicals going into the ocean and it affects the animals in the ocean, like fish and whatever seafood items you like to eat that are in the ocean, what does that do to your food? And this is something you got to think about. Now, I'm not saying like you have to have seafood as a necessity. No, not necessarily, but that affects not just the water, it affects the animals. They are literally destroying the planet. And I feel like not enough people are upset about it. Not as many as should be. And this is one of the issues when we talk about climate. This is one of those issues that they keep us divided over, left versus right. And we really shouldn't, this should not be a left-right issue when it comes to climate, because all of us will be affected. But the political arena has turned it into such. So essentially, if you're on the right, you don't believe that climate change is even like a thing. Maybe not everyone, but that's the message. If you're on the left, you do believe that climate change is real. So the problem is that we are already seeing the effects. At least I know I have, you guys probably have too. Record temperatures during the summer. We're starting to see those effects in places like Canada having triple digits during the summer. That happened last year. That's not supposed to happen. The sea level is rising. I can tell. I notice the difference. I love the beach. I go to the beach every summer. I can see the difference. I can tell. So you have cities like mine, like Baltimore, the Boston is already preparing. Should we put a wall around the Seaport District to prepare for the sea level because it continues to rise? These are real issues that are going to affect all of us, especially if you live on the coast. If you're on the East Coast, West Coast, South Coast, North, if you are by a water, you will be affected. And it's not just about the water, it's about droughts, all of these different things that we have to deal with in reference to the climate, because the military industrial complex is literally destroying the planet. And I want to tell you why rich people don't care. This part is really important. Those people have enough money to get the hell out of here when something happens. You don't believe me? There are bunkers that rich people have. I'm talking millionaires, billionaires, bunkers that they have underground so that when we have the next pandemic, they have a place where they can run and hide. We'll have to stand up here and fight alone. This is why we need to pay attention to the class issue. They have the money and the resources that when times get tough and the water starts to come in, they have the money and the resources where they can leave and they can go somewhere else. And most of us will not have it. This is why you have to pay attention to the class issue. Now, here's the thing. If they keep us fighting over left versus right, while these things are happening around us, nothing will change. We may get a little bit of change here and there, but it's not going to change significantly enough. And before you know it, the catastrophe's here and there's nothing we can do to even go back and try to fix it. Now, we can't completely reverse the climate effects. We can't completely reverse it. It's too far gone now. But we can try to implement some type of change. And so as long as the military industrial complex is doing what they are doing, we are still going to have a climate issue and a climate crisis that is coming more so in the future. That is not going to change. Now, I'm not going to play the entire video, but this is on Breakthrough News. I highly recommend that you check out the rest of that interview. We have to wake up, people. We have to wake up. This should not be a left-right issue. And it's frustrating to me to listen to people argue over this left and this right politician when neither one of them is going to help us in the future. When climate is concerned, you need more than one person. You have to get everybody on board, and you really have to start with the military industrial complex. So if none of these candidates are going there, which is what Abby is just telling you, if they're not going to reach that moment, then they are not getting my vote, period. Whether they are third party or independent, you have to fix the climate issue and you have to go after the military industrial complex first. That is how you do that. Everyone else is just playing games at this point. Really. Because all this other stuff, recycling, electric vehicles, that's cute, but that's not enough. And some people aren't going to tell you that. I'm going to tell you that it is not enough. If you have kids, if you have grandkids, you may not be alive when it happens, but your kids and your grandkids will. And you should care.